1980s. I'm very old. And I can't remember a decade like this one. In entrepreneurial terms, there are 2 billion children in the world, 1.98 billion children in the world. 3/4 of them are having an unsatisfactory experience. 2 billion times, think of a per capita figure, is for sure the biggest market in the world in any which way, but it's also the biggest need in the world, and that's what I really want to focus on today. If you don't know me, I build schools and universities all around the world. Here I am in the Caribbean building what looks like an immensely strong school, and of course just the other day hurricanes swept through the Caribbean and my school survived, and the communities rush into the school to shelter, and I think that's what education does for us. I think it provides a place to bring communities together, to give shelter, to give future. That's a rare sight to see me in a hard hat. I wasn't actually building it, but it was certainly my school. And I sail a boat, which I'm going to bore you with a picture of because it's a very old boat. This is my boat over here on the left, and was built in 1907 to fish for oysters in the River Thames just outside here. And I think that's significant because below decks on my boat, I race it. It's a race boat. You can see we're in a race here. Below decks, we have technology, computer systems. It looks like NASA downstairs, still all the original oak and the original wood. And I think with learning, it's that combination of the craft and knowledge of what makes great learning and the technology and science of what makes it better that is so exciting going forwards. And so I unashamedly show you a picture of my boat, and I'll put that away for a moment. Let's go to Google for a minute. Google has a thing called the Ngram viewer, which if you haven't used, it searches all the books they've digitized from 1900 through to about 2008, 2009. And if I search on there for learning, you can see a steady upward graph. Learning has never been more fashionable. Turn on the television in your hotel tonight, you'll see people learning to bake, learning to dance, learning to sing. When they interview Lewis Hamilton yesterday after the Grand Prix, he said, "We learnt so fast," was the first thing he said, talking about his team. On the other hand, if I search for education, the graph is tapering off, and indeed if I search for learner-led, you can see the graph really starts to storm upwards. So you can play around with this in your own time, but what we learn from this, I think, is that learning has never been more fashionable, but education probably not so. By the way, if you want to have a bit of fun with this, let's put in maybe fake news, which is always good to search for. And well, there's a slightly scary graph because the last time fake news peaked was just before World War II. So good fun you can have with searching for data. I've put everything we're looking at here. I've put it onto a web page for you, so you don't need to write or take photographs of the slides. Or I'm not quite sure of the order we're going to go through this or what we're going to cover, but it depends on the look of excitement on your faces, really, so which direction we go. But most of it's there, and if you simply go to the URL, there we go, heppell.net/education 2027, you'll find all the resources and longer links and more detailed things and stuff you can follow up in detail, and a slightly alarming picture of me as well. Okay. We know a lot about where learning is going. I was asked by the UK government twice, once in 1997 by the Blair government, then once a couple of years ago by Michael Gove, David Willett, our current Conservative government before the last election. They said, "Stephen, what does the future look like?" And I was able to say with pretty solid conviction, really, "Ministers, it looks like this." By 2025, because they asked me in 2015, we know with certainty that it's going to be global. I was in Africa last week, in Doha at the end of the week, in Australia a little before that. When I'm flying in Australia, I'm on the Qantas plane, Queensland and Northern Territories Air Service, Qantas, but it isn't anymore a domestic carrier, it's a global carrier. I flew back from Johannesburg on a British Airways flight. It's not anymore a British carrier, it's a global carrier. There will not be a national curriculum in any country. There will be global curricula. There will be global solutions for education. We're past the time of national already, and by the time period we're looking at. So it's going to go global. We're going to know a lot more about it. We're going to know a lot more about what learning looks like, how we measure it, looking at the cognitive processes. We can put children's heads in functional MRI scanners now and say, okay, do some simultaneous equations. We look at the bit of their brain that lights up, and goodness me, the same bit of their brain that lights up when they're doing art. Who knew? And the technology we're using is going to be the students, it's not going to be ours. You've seen the revolution that's happened with health. You used to go to the doctor, he'd say, well, Stephen, old friend, you're going to be dead tomorrow. And oh, that's a shame. Now you arrive and you know your BMI, your health, your pulse rates given to you by a watch, you've got your physical data, you arrive in charge of your own health and your own learning for a consultation about how it can be better. The same will happen in learning. The learning will be owned by the students, not by the institutions, not by the corporations, not by the governments, and that's a huge turnaround. Let's have a look at what some of that looks like as we go forward. Let's take something as simple, really, as the physical environment. So here's a typical classroom. This is hideous in so many ways. The light is too low, the ability to move around. We know absolutely that if children don't move regularly, one immediate result is depression all over the world. We're worried about the well-being of children. Children are getting more depressed because they're not moving. They're sat in classrooms facing the same direction. But this classroom is particularly hideous. The blinds are down. Well, I can show you the data. So we've built a little box that allows us to measure the data in classrooms and see how close it comes to the best data for learning. We know what temperature your brain works best at, 18 to 21 degrees. And by the way, every degree above 21 degrees, your ability to do maths goes down and it's a straight line. By the time you get to 23 degrees, which is not hot, we're running at about 24.7 in here at the moment, so forgive me if you're struggling. By the time you get to 23 degrees, a kid doing a maths paper would be about 2.8 to 3% worse off in their final mark. Straight data. And this room, as we were measuring at the lux level, 172, that's appalling. You can't think properly unless you're above 500 lux. I'm building universities and schools to 500, 700, 1,000. Everything I've built in the last 2 years has been over 1,000 lux. I walk into classrooms and I see levels of 172. I walk into examination rooms and I've seen levels. Well, I've been into 100. Well, in the last year and a half, I've been into 57 examination rooms and I have not been into a single room that didn't damage the performance of the children. Every single room. It's as though I'd visited every Premiership football team playing field in the country and found they were all mud and the players were having to wear lead boots. It's dreadful. And it appalls me that we can have got this far without really looking at the data or what makes good learning. This has come to me because I do a lot of work with the Olympic team. I work with the British Olympic team. I've been working with them since China, since Beijing, and one of the things we've discovered, of course, they knew already, is the aggregation of marginal gains. Every little detail makes sport better, and it turns out makes learning better too. The British cycling team spent a lot of time and money researching the best pillows for the athletes to rest their heads on at night. They take the pillows with them where they compete. We don't even know what the best food is to eat for breakfast before you learn. If I was, well, clearly I'm not Mo Farah, I don't quite have the build, but if I was an Olympian athlete, I'm a sailor, I would know exactly what to eat on the morning of my big event, and on the morning of the heat for my big event, and on the week before, and the month before, and the 4 years before. Do you know how much research evidence there is about the best food to eat for breakfast on the morning of your examination? None. There is none. We've just started the project in Madrid. By the way, if you've got children, it's looking at the moment as though the best thing you could eat would be some dried mango with a little bit of chocolate on it. The chocolate's going to give you a little bit of optimism. I could do this, And the dried mango would just trickle sugar into your body slowly during the exam. The worst thing you could possibly have before an exam would be a can of Red Bull. Sugar peak, caffeine destroys your short-term concentration. You arrive at the exam, your eyes are wide open, you just can't remember why you're there. So I've been taking what we've been doing with schools and turning it into, well, let me give you an example. Here's the British Olympic hockey squad. I thought you'd enjoy hockey. And this is their training room, which is pretty ghastly. It's just a bunch of chairs facing in the same direction with a screen and some windows and not very good light. And they weren't winning so many medals. Here's what we did afterwards. We converted the space. We put them on tiered seats. We've given them high levels of light. The same room. We've given them little avatars on the floor. We've given them multiple screens all around. We've given them zones. So here's a place where you debate. Here's a place where you look and listen. Here's a place where you present. Here's a place where you work just on your own. And it's worked extraordinarily well. If you followed the World Championship this summer, you'll see that both the men's and the women's team did really well on set pieces. 3 of their key matches were decided by set pieces in that room on that floor. And if you follow rugby, maybe, you'll know who this chap is. If you don't follow rugby, it doesn't really matter, but he's the coach of the England team, and they're entirely focused on. See, what's interesting about working with sport is they say to you, what should we do? And he said, well, do this, 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 and this. And they say, why? And he said, well, here's the science, here's the cognition, here's the physiology, here's what we know, here's the data. And they say, right, we'll do it. And you go back a month later and they've done it. When I'm working with ministers, here was me talking to a group of ministers in 2000, when was this? 2012, and I said to them, hey, chaps, this is what you should do. 5 years on, I don't think many of them have done it. So sport moves fast. Learning moves really slowly, and we learn, my goodness, we learn from that. Of course, if I look at old habits, they can be, actually I might just show you this. This is, I wasn't going to show you this, but I think you deserve it. So here's a really boring graph. And I think everybody should see at least one boring graph in a presentation. So here's yours, and it's huge. And look, this is the performance in science of countries all around the world. You can see, I think, that Finland is the top nation. Nobody has a science score as high as Finland. And look along, you'll see the Netherlands, New Zealand, Australia, Great Britain, Norway. Kind of interesting, though, that there are 2 axes on this graph. One axis is for excellence in science in the examination room. The other axis is whether the kids had any interest in the subject at all when they left school. And you can see terrifyingly that the kids in Finland are the least likely in the world to ever do science again. And if I asked you now for a show of hands of who has a Nokia phone with them, 10 years ago you'd have all put your hand up. Now 1 or 2 of you might have one, but you'd be ashamed to say. And that's because no child in Finland would want to go and work for Nokia. and do science and technology because they're learning so bad. You'd actually probably sooner be up here with maybe Brazil or Mexico or Chile, where they know absolutely nothing, but they're loving it and they're having a good time. But interestingly, the opportunity, the commercial opportunity, the moral opportunity, the social opportunity is there. There is nowhere in the world where the children are loving their learning and succeeding. This is OECD data, not my data. That's unsustainable. I'm a BAFTA judge. I get to watch all the movies every year and walk down the red carpet with George Clooney and whoever. You know, it's great fun. My best glamorous evening of the year. We come out of the BAFTA party at about 4 a.m, looking slightly worse for the wear on Park Lane. We're standing in the road outside. It's raining. Nobody can get a cab. I'm standing there with some of the most famous, some of the wealthiest people in the world, and they can't get a cab. And you think, you know what? Cabs aren't working. And then, of course, along comes Uber and says, you know what? Cabs aren't working. We can do this better. That's where we are with education. Absolutely. It's kind of Uber, Airbnb moment. And we'll come back to that in a moment. We've got time. So just scampering on from there, there are some interesting directions to think about, and I think this is probably a fair summary of where the world is. For me, about a quarter of the world is saying, you know what, with new technology, we'd like to build tomorrow sooner. Let's get there as fast as we can. Why we're here? What does it say on the conference heading? Three-quarters of the world, though, this country in particular, but others, are saying, you know, what can we build yesterday cheaper? But nobody is saying, can we have tomorrow sooner and cheaper? And I'm here to tell you, of course we can. Let's look at some of the ways that can be. So, first of all, it would be nice, I think, if we could look at learning in the round. Look, here's a silly example, really, but I've been building these things in schools, having a lot of fun. These are slides. This is a school in south coast of England. The kids didn't want to use the library. For them, it was boring and old-fashioned, so I put a slide in. Here it's a pretty cool slide. Had to pay for it myself because there was no budget for play. You know, here are the children waiting to jump out of the library window with their books. Here's the slide. Here's staff development. The staff all had a bit of a party and then jumped out of the window too. It all worked extraordinarily well. But what's interesting about this is it's not about play, it's about cognition. Your brain remembers things by the social markers. We know. If you think back to your best learning experience, well, let's just go briefly to your best learning experience. If we go to your best learning experience, this was when we surveyed a few thousand people, it's all these things. You're doing stuff. You had an audience for what you were doing. It was, well, you can read this yourself. But you'll notice at the bottom, there was passion and eccentricity. Your favorite teacher was a little bit crazy. And that craziness translated into cognitive mapping. The 7% of your brain that remembers isn't so important as the 93% of your brain that works out what goes with it. If you drive a car, you remember the day you learned to drive. It was really hard, steering and pressing all the levers, and oh my goodness. Now when you drive, you're on autopilot. You don't think about steering. But if you're driving along the road, maybe you're coming along Riverside here, you see a parent and a child and a dog and a bus coming the other way, and you say, look, the kid's too far from the mum. If the kid starts to run, the mum won't get it. The dog isn't on a lead. The bus driver's going too fast. I'm going to slow down. You've never been in a situation where the child and the dog and the mother and the bus had a collision, but your brain matches the pattern and says, you know what, I can act on this. That's what learning is about. That's how you learn. And a little bit of eccentricity, a little bit of play makes the difference. And that's why, you know, if I walk into Google's offices all over the world, every Google office has got a slide in it and got play equipment in. Not because it's fun, but because it's learning, because it's cognitive science, because it works. Now, oh, and by the way, I've put this in my own home, I believe in this stuff, so I live with my grandchildren. I've got a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old living with me, so I built a slide, and I rather cleverly thought if I put a climbing wall in, so the only way you can get up the slide is to climb up the wall, I thought this will stop the little children hurting themselves, because I'd failed to allow for the way that children help each other. And here's the 1-year-old on the roof. How did she get up there? I don't know, but I took a picture and then panicked. So, what we learn from all this is that it's complicated. What happens when we say to children, hey, would you help us with making over your own learning spaces? Here's a project we've been doing in Spain. I guess you want the English version, not the Spanish, but these schools, we gave children the task of making over their own classroom. And we said, you can make learning better. We gave them a tight budget. These children were given a budget of 500 euros. And at the end of their 18-month project, they opened the thing, they launched it, they gave me back 100 euros. They said, hey, we didn't need all the money. No, exactly. And by the way, we're proud to have done it. You give them a finite budget, they have to make choices. So what we were asking them for was their research, not their opinion. You're not saying to teenagers, what would you like? We're saying, what are the other schools doing that would work that you might want to try here? And here's a little bit of money to make it happen. And by the way, the learning, this lot we gave no money to. We said, we'll give you no funding at all, but we'll give you the freedom to do it. And so to get the paint for their table, they had to say to parents, has anybody got any old paint? Everybody's got old paint. They built that little 3-sided space over there from chicken wire and cardboard. They just did the whole thing. What's interesting about all this is what then happened to their schools, because their schools were transformed. The children's design of learning based on their research was so good. The school said, hey, we've got children who are engaged, they arrive earlier, we can't get them to leave at the end of the day, the quality of their work has gone up, what's not to like? Let's do the whole school. Now that's interesting, because and one of those boys, actually, a boy called Lucas, he said to me, leant over halfway through the project, and he said, in Spanish, he said, I've been to 7 schools so far in my life. This is the first time anybody's asked me how it could be better. But you know what, I've always known. And that was before he started the research. So we thought, well, that's interesting, because we could use those children to design better learning elsewhere. So I've taken those children, brought them into my university in Madrid. As you heard at the beginning, I'm a professor in UCJC in Madrid. See the name of the place up there. And we said to those same children, we said, we've got a space in the university. We'd like you to make it over. And we gave them 2 days to design it. They'd already done the research about what made learning good. So here they are, building the whole thing in an old factory building, building the whole thing in cardboard. Oh, this was the wiring, don't look. This is me trying not to be electrocuted, but they've built it all in cardboard. You can see it. They like the idea of a Harkness table to collaborate. They like the idea of a maker space to do 3D printing and laser cutting. They like the idea of a presentation space. It was all pretty cool, there it all is. They designed it in SketchUp, and now we're in the throes of actually building the space. And do I have an image of the space in here? Oh, possibly not. So we're in the throes of building that as a complete and finished space, and it's pretty exciting. There's another way you could do it. You could take all that research and spend a lot of money. So here's a university space I've built. We took all the research we had about light levels, about sound, and here it is. It's a fabulous space. It's got spaces in it for, if I zoom down here, you can see the Vice-Chancellor here having a meeting. If I zoom over here, there are people having seminars. There's a little seminar going on here, and down in this corner, there are people having lunch, So the building works in multiple levels, huge levels of light pouring through the roof, not a single parallel surface in the building, so the sound can't bounce backwards and forwards. This is a state-of-the-art learning space, £30 million worth of learning space. But the space the students designed when we gave them the challenge of design a space you would like to come to when you get old enough to come to university, is costing us €240,000. Interesting how much cheaper this can be when we involve the children in it. And, you know, when you do the maths and start looking around the world, goodness me, there are 25 million children who are displaced from education at the moment. Well, on a ratio of 25 to 1, which would be quite poor for learning, that means we've got to find 1 million teachers. We're not going to find them. So where do we find 1 million people to help children to learn? Oh, it's the children. The children have to be at the heart and centre of all this, and the spaces we build have to be owned by, have to be designed by, have to be co-constructed with those kids. And look, this really matters, because where's technology leading us? Look, here's a really slightly scary slide. I'm doing a lot of work at the moment in quantum computing. If you haven't read into quantum computing and the impact of the magnitude, you know, as we go from a 2-bit computer on and off to a qubit computer, 2 ons, 2 offs, ons and offs, you know the way quantum physics works with multiple instances and threading and so on. But a quantum computer can do massive calculations, and is good at all those things over there. Today's computers, and tomorrow's for sure, are really good at those things, really good at those things. So there's absolutely no point in building schools to produce children who are good at those things. I go into schools all around the world, I find children doing what they're told, repeating stuff, remembering, trying to fit with rule-based. There's just no point. There is no employment for them. And what people are good at, however, is this. People are really good at these things. Ingenuity, creativity, deep understanding. And if we're going to complement the new tools we've got, you know, I was flying back from Qatar. I had a little computer in my pocket. Where is it? It's just a little tiny computer here, you know, so small you can barely see it. It's an Arduino bean, like a tiny thing, you know. And I was idly programming it in my seat, and business class chap in the seat next door starting to panic because I'm, you know, programming away, lights are flashing on my device, you know. And he said, what is that? In a slightly nervous way. I said, it's an Arduino bean, you know, they're really cheap computer. It outperforms a laptop you're working on, actually, but it's pretty cute, you know, they cost almost $10. He said, wow, what are you doing? I said, I'm programming. He said, I've always wanted to be able to program. I said, well, I'll teach you before we land. And so before we landed, I taught him how to program. And he couldn't wait to show his kids. He said, they think I've got a really boring job. I mean, he did have a really boring job, to be honest. He said, I've got a really boring job, but I'll be able to show my sons I could do something really cool. But he wasn't excited because I told him how to remember things, or how to batch process, or I showed him how to solve problems. When I arrived just before the break here, and I popped over to the guys at the back, and I said, I need to have my laptop on the stage because I haven't really got slides. I'm just going to show people stuff. And they said, oh, blimey, we're not really sorted out for that. And within 12 minutes, they tried 3 solutions, picked the best one, and I'm showing it to you now. Yeah, exactly. That's problem solving. That's a fresh look. Let me show you 3 things very quickly, and then we're going to be out of time, that come from a fresh look at all this. First of all, here's a fresh look at what schools might be like. I'm building this at the moment. This is Schola Liberum, which is Latin for free school. It's a school that takes place in your own home. Why on earth would we spend a huge amount of capital building schools when most of what the physical school does is get in the way of learning? Why wouldn't we use the facilities we already have? If some of you are in property, you'll know we've got a lot of spare commercial premises. We've got a lot of spare retail premises. If we walk down Tottenham Court Road in London, one shop in 7 is shut. So we've got a lot of space opening up at the heart of our communities. Why wouldn't we use that for learning? So this is a model. I've put the link on the webpage for you. This is a model where children learn with each other in their families safely. It'll work, by the way, in northern Nigeria. Boko Haram won't come after these kids because there is no school. So it's a complete reversal, building a school from a community of children, probably 6 or 8 children, no more, mixed age. You know, one of the crazy things happens when we go into a school. Children are sat in one room because they're born between 2 Septembers, or in the Southern Hemisphere, 2 Januaries. Imagine if you'd have come in this room and the numbers on the tables would have been ages. You've got to sit with the 33-year-olds, the 57-year-olds over here, the 75-year-olds. I mean, how embarrassing would that have been? And how foolish, because as a 75-year-old, you'd want to learn from the 33-year-old. So there's a heap of stuff we do in education that's expensive. Here's one alternative, and I'm quite excited by that possibility. Here's one more. And this, I think, I'll leave you with this. So this is a project, a UNICEF project. I'm building these all my projects. The links are on the web page. But we're taking Syrian refugee kids in Jordan, and they have a huge problem, as you know. A lot of them don't have many parents. It costs a lot of money to get out of Syria, and so there's often one mum, 3 families with the kids. They're working. They've fled from the camps mostly. They're living in the rural areas, and we want, on the other hand, we want them to be doing STEM and STEAM activities. We want them to be playing with the new manufacturing of tomorrow. This is, you can't see this, but this is a 3D, this is 3D printing in steel. So here's look, you can tell it's steel, listen. Okay. 3D printing in steel. We want them to be focusing their ingenuity on new problems. So with this project, kids all over the world thinking of a problem, build a better hat, and a better hat in, a better hat in Jordan might be a hat with solar panels, battery storage, lights under the brim, beaming down to help you read a book. And we might say, come on, build a better hat. So they put a box load of components, send them out to the kids in Jordan. Kids in Jordan have a go at building a better hat. The kids in England or Australia or wherever, India, have a go at building a better hat. They compare their hats afterwards. At the end of a year, the refugee kids, Syrian kids in Jordan, have done 10 projects building STEM-related activity. They can program, they can solder, they can solve problems quickly like you guys, and they can work online and they can work with others on the same line of longitude, on the same line of latitude. Those kids will be worth more money than the kids in traditional, old-school education buildings. So I leave you with the opportunity not to finesse learning and build something a little better and a little shiny with better light and better CO2 and better other things. I leave you with the chance to build a better world on the back of learning. My passion in this is to mend the world with learning. It's not to mend the world with education. You have the chance to build global learning, to make a lot of money out of it, and to do it way cheaper than anybody's done before, and to do it for more people. What's not to like? Go to it. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, what an amazing presentation about the future of learning. Please give him another round of applause. Stephen is going to be around for a while, outside having coffee and cookies. So if you want to meet with him, ask questions, exchange cards, please do so. We're here to network. In the meantime, can I ask Mr. Manoj from MTC and Mr. Prakash Singhvi, Vice Chairman of JITO, to come on stage? No, you stay here.
I should, by the way, have explained why I have a pirate symbol on here, in case you think I'm some heinous hacker. I was doing a presentation for Hewlett-Packard the other day, and they didn't want my Apple symbol to be on here. And as a sailor, the only sticker I had was a skull and crossbones, so I quite like it now, Thank you.
Manoj from MTC and Sanjay from MTC.
Mr. Manoj and Mr. Sanjay from MTC, are you here? Please come on stage. We're going to give Professor Stephen Heppell a small token of our appreciation for being here with us this morning. And as I said, whilst they're doing that, as I said, Professor Heppell will be outside for a while, having tea and cookies. If you're interested in education, if there's anything you like, any questions you have about the future of learning.
So you can use it in companies, this learning process.
And as Arunji says very rightly, this learning process will work in companies. We're in the era where learning doesn't stop at school anymore. And knowing what learning, good learning looks like and how to learn is incredibly, incredibly useful. This morning you heard a number of times it's all about people. And looking after your people, understanding that they're learning and developing your and executing your vision is very important. So one more round for Professor Stephen Heppell. And we're running a few minutes late, but we're going to try and catch up. Yes. We're running a few minutes late, but we're going to try and catch up. So to introduce our next speaker, can I ask Mr. Anand Surana to introduce the next speaker? Thank you.